Zola Levitt Presents with Dr. Jeffrey Seif and Sandra Levitt. She shall be called woman.
I came forth from a man.
But I found favor with
Successful,
him.
and
now
true success is not measured in wealth and power, but in the estate of one's heart.
I've never been happier and more
Ever
fulfilled.
hoped for. I raised him up strictly in the faith,
and
the
more.
law, and the prophets.
And now I want to give something back.
I believe Elohim meant it to be this way.
She's still a cornerstone of wisdom to the family.
But you
And as
are
I see-
always in my heart.
I can never say enough good things about my son Timothy. That's him as a boy when I was teaching him the alphabet. Oh, he was the brightest and the most well-behaved child a mother could ever hope for. I raised him up strictly in the faith, the law and the prophets, as my mother Lois had taught me. And as he grew up to become a man, he never departed from our teachings. It is a mother's dream to see her child become successful, and true success is not measured in wealth and power, but in the estate of one's heart. My mother taught me that. She's still a cornerstone of wisdom to the family. And as I see my son sharing his testimony of salvation through our Messiah, Yeshua, words cannot express my joy and gratification.
A hearty shalom to all of you. Jeffrey Seif here with my friend Sandra Levitt.
Shalom, welcome back. We're talking about women today. We've just seen a drama with Lois and Eunice.
Two great women.
Just great. The series, She Shall Be Called Woman. This is just a terrific name of a series. Woman, I
And there's
love
a
it.
great story here of a woman, or a story of women that nurture the next generation. Goodness, they do it so well.
What kind of role model am I for my child, who in turn becomes a role model for his child? And in this case, the grandmother, the mother, and then the praying and the faith of the son. I think it's wonderful, Timothy.
They educate, rear up the next generation.
They absolutely
You were a
do.
teacher, weren't you?
I
Educator.
was a high school administrator, and you were a teacher.
18 years as a professor.
18 years.
This is another kind of education, though. It's moral development, not just intellectual.
And
correct?
how important is that now in these days? Just terrific. Here's Jeff in Israel. She shall be called woman.
It has been said that it takes a man to build a house. Of course it does. These bricks are heavy. These logs are heavy as well, and it takes a man to put it together. While it takes a man to build a house, likewise it's been said that it takes a woman to build a home. And why is that? Sticks and bricks, this is one thing, but building up the generation is another thing. And while this can be done in a matter of days or weeks, this work here takes place over a matter of years, and it's mother who's principally responsible. So much of what the children become, they become because of mom. Mazeh. Look. Aleph, Mem, Tov, the Hebrew word emet, truth. They learn the truth in so many ways. It's mother who teaches, educates in how to write, how to think, how to behave. I believe it's for this reason that in the Hebrew Bible, wisdom, chocham, smarts, is personified as a female. Wisdom speaks. She says this, she does that in the book of Proverbs. Shlomo, Solomon, knows a lot about wisdom. In fact, his book starts off in the prologue. My son, forget not your father's teaching, and forsake not your mother's instruction. Holding on to mom's instruction is a tad bit firmer, and why is that? Again, because of so much of what the child becomes, they become because of the imprint that mom leaves upon them. In this series, we're looking at women in general, and here we want to look at the contribution in the education of the young in particular. Francis Xavier said, give me your children for the first 7 years, anyone can have them afterward. Another wise person said once that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. In a moment, we're going to go to a famous rabbi, Rav Shaul, commonly referred to in some circles as the Apostle Paul. And we'll enter into the world of some conversation he has with his favorite Talmidim, a disciple named Timothy. And we'll hear Paul remind Timothy that what he was, he became in large measure because of his mother and his grandmother. And in the process of looking at that story, we'll consider women and how it is they make such a contribution in their children and in the world at large. When people find themselves hard-pressed at the ragged edge of life, they tend to articulate things that have great value to them. Their thoughts run deep, their emotions run strong, and within their cerebral cortex, they frame thoughts that so much give definition to what that person is all about and what they think. It's for that reason, in part, that when in foxholes, when facing an uncertain future, a soldier is more apt to write a letter to his mother than to his father. And why is that? Discomforted as the soldier is, the tendency is to draw upon memories and emotions of that person that came to him in times of trouble. You know, there's an old song, when I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. Well, Mother Mary, Mother Sally, whatever. The reason why I mention this at this juncture is because when the Apostle Paul is right up against the grave, when he writes 2 Timothy, he says as much, I've fought the fight, I've finished the race. He gives his valedictory speech. He knows he's at the ragged edge. And he finishes the note signing off to Timothy and saying, thank you very much. But he begins the letter drawing upon memories of a time when he first encountered Timothy. Oh, he's thrilled that Timothy has been so very loyal, so very faithful. When you've lived life for a while, you tend to place a premium on character over charisma. Loyalty is in very high demand and very short supply. When noting his sterling character, Paul reminds Timothy where he got it from. In fact, he reminds himself. In chapter 1, verse 5, he says, when I bring you to remembrance, Timothy, who had a Jewish mother, by the way, he says, when I bring you to remember, I remember your genuine faith that is in you, and it's a faith that is in you that was inculcated in you, he says, first by your grandmother Lois, and then by your mother Eunice. And he says, and I am persuaded that it is in you also. With the passage of time, Paul has encountered many insincere people. He goes on to say, as he finishes his introduction, in verse 15 he says, all alike in Asia have abandoned me. They've all turned away. But Timothy, you have been resolute. Timothy was resolute in part because of things that were sown into him when he was younger. Hence, herein we see an example of the value of a woman. That is to say that Paul credits Timothy being who he is because of the women in his world that guided him. Doesn't mean that they just sat down and opened up scrolls. There's some of that because these women opened up the scriptures. It's tragic today. People think, well, I'll just send the children off to a rabbi or to a Sunday school teacher in a church, and it's incumbent upon those professionals to give my kid a measured religious education. That thought really doesn't exist in the Jewish world, not this world. It's imperative that the family give the child the virtue. It's imperative that the mother inculcate the religious seeds into the next generation. These women did a good job. When we move on in the 3rd chapter, Paul here is encouraging Timothy and us by association to continue in the things that are learned. What can happen with the passage of time owing to pressing exigent circumstances? Things can impinge upon us. We can experience pressures and difficulties that we didn't count upon. But it's good that we draw upon core values in answering the troubles of the day, and it's Mother in so many ways who instills those values. Well, here Paul says, you must continue in the things that you have learned and been assured of, knowing from whom you learned them. Certainly you have a tacit inference here to remember your mother's example. The reason why I say tacit is because what's explicit, what's noted then is from whom you learned what? He says in verse 15 that from childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation. Well, we know that Mother guided the fellow. In the process of so doing, there's things that he learned. He's going to encounter Paul. He's going to encounter Jesus. This is a fellow raised by a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father who's going to come to faith in the Jewish Messiah, Jesus. Before Jesus ever gets a hold of him, his mother did. And he was a wonderful human being. Life can grind away at people. It can grind us into powder. It's good to have a biblical foundation, and it's good to appreciate a woman who helps guide the boys and girls to be the kind of people that God would have them to be.
I love the teaching in Israel. I love hearing about Lois and Eunice. I love, personally for me, how it is to teach a child how to walk with the Lord. There's nothing greater for me in this whole world.
Well, now, Sandra, that's not the spirit of this age that
No,
says that, women educating children, raising them up is marginal. There's more important things to attend to.
It's not politically correct. It's not politically correct. And yet, really for me, nothing, if somebody said to you or to me, what is the most important thing for your child? It is that he knows the Lord. It truly is.
What spirit drives the culture to disconnect a woman from her children? What is more important than raising up the next generation?
Right, teaching them to pray, teaching them to witness, teaching them to have faith. What could be more important than
Well, we have education today. It's morally bankrupt, that the purpose is reading, writing, and arithmetic. But if I understand you correctly, there's more than just learning about reading, writing, and arithmetic.
There is so much more. This is really it.
Sciences are important.
Right.
Professional
Yes.
development is important.
Yes.
But what good does it do at one level if one is trained up professionally and is successful financially, but is abysmal morally? And we have a lot of that today.
Right. Man cannot serve two masters. You can only serve one master. And this is the master that I want to serve.
Yes, and there's a grandmother and a mother that are introducing a young man to that master.
Generation after generation after generation. Teach a child the way he is to go, and he'll go. And that's what I love about Eunice and Lois. Not just the mother, but the grandmother.
It's hard to overstate the value
Right. I know.
that a woman
I know.
plays
Right.
in raising up the next generation.
I agree.
The moral development, the ethics, the substance, the character. So much comes from mom.
It's another attribute of women. It's another wonderful aspect of women that I think I want people to know about.
Do you think that that was marginalized too much in a previous generation? That is, that women shouldn't be as concerned for
I think
home and hearth?
I think a lot of times people, like you said in your teaching, sent them off to another school, sent them somewhere else to be taught. That wasn't my job. That I'll let somebody else do that. And I think now we're coming around to seeing much more hands-on in the home. I really do.
Are you finding a lot of Christian women involved in education too, not only loving their own children but others as well?
That's interesting because the woman that I interviewed, Beth Furst in Israel, wonderful educator, but here's the trick, not trick, but here's the really special thing. She's at a Messianic school in Israel. That is unbelievable. Loves the Lord, loves teaching, loves giving the kids the groundwork. I asked Beth, how long and why? Why did you move to Israel? Here's what Beth had to say.
My husband had lived in Israel on a kibbutz, and he had always meant to return. And I had always felt that I was going to come. So we were in two different places, doing two different things in the Messianic lifestyle. but God put us together. And I think for 4 years, which it took us 4 years to actually marry, we discussed coming to Israel and living here, and in our hearts we really believed that it would happen. It didn't happen so quickly. In that interim, we adopted a little girl from Paraguay. And then when we finally were getting close to our 50s, thinking it was the Jubilee year coming up,
Right, that's correct.
that we kind of were coming down to a place of saying, if we don't do it now,
When are we going to do
we
it?
won't do it. We've talked about it, we've thought about it, we've got a daughter, we've got a family, we've completed what we felt like should be completed, and if we didn't take the step, we felt the door would be closed. So we came, and in the beginning it was the tough Olim story that everyone else has, starting at the bottom, starting over, going from being a somebody to a nobody, going from being known and having many friends to being no one knows who you are and you're an ant on the wall. Start over. But God had a plan, and I had 30 years of teaching experience for preschool behind me and an art background.
Yes.
And I was now getting a little old to be that preschool teacher, although I brought all my things with me, thinking I would be starting again. Instead, I gave them away. And Makor HaTikva, the Messianic school in Jerusalem, needed an art teacher and asked if I would like to try. So I was not an art teacher, but I tried. And it's 2.5 years later now, and I've been, like other people who come to Israel, learning as I go and teaching as I go what I'm learning. And it's been a great thing, because I know that this is where God ultimately was calling me to be. There's something in Ecclesiastes that says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. And I always find things to do. If it's not one thing, it's another thing. If I'm not getting paid, fine, I'll be a volunteer. If you need something done, I'll help, I can do it. And that's been sort of my scripture to live by. So I think falling into a need here that had to do with art was just finding something to do, and I've found ways to teach this with all my might, and the kids are grabbing hold of it with all their might. And it's been a great, coming together and doing a lot for them also in the land.
Oh, it's wonderful. We're sitting, I think, in your classroom, and I'm looking at all the pictures. They're just wonderful things in here. How wonderful to express for young children to express art.
It's not only just that, and that's a big part of it, but the art and this class is a place that the kids can come together and they can all succeed. And Israel is a struggle. And the kids that come here, they're coming in from different countries with different languages, different strengths or weaknesses in the language of Hebrew. And they come into this place, and it's not a language of words.
No,
it's a language of expression.
Right.
And there's no right and there's no wrong, and they can
right.
all do it.
That's right.
And that's what I love, because I've been there myself. And I know what it's like to have a place that you can succeed. If you can't do it in other ways, in other places that are important, at least you can do it here and feel good about it, and you're achieving something.
Well, and what a blessing that they can feel like they've achieved, that they're not having to learn something, that this is theirs. It's their expression, and it's great to have to let that go.
And besides that, too, it's about giving them a way to see the beauty of what is around them, because Israel can be a hard and harsh place, but it's also a beautiful place. And one of the things I try to teach the kids is to open up your eyes and actually see, and a lot of it has to do with nature, not always, but at least this year we've done a lot with nature and landscaping, but it's to see what God has made, and then how do you react to that? And you can't help but react positively. I'm not an art media teacher who says, if you feel angry and disgusting, use black and red and show it. Who needs that? I mean,
it's great that you're
teaching,
but that you're teaching young minds, because that really does prepare them for their future.
That's right.
Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
talking with us.
Okay.
Beth's a great example of a woman who cares and shares and loves and nurtures the next generation. I find it fascinating personally when I look in the Bible. I see a correlation between the feminine gender and wisdom. there's a classification of Old Testament literature called sapiental literature or wisdom literature, and there wisdom is personified as a female. I think it's fascinating personally because women have so much to do with wiring the next generation, and this is evidenced in so many ways, isn't it?
It really is. It's really dear to my heart because the next generation, as it goes, they're the ones taking care of us. And if they don't take care of us, they're not going to take care of their children either. And that's really important for me.
Yes, and a mother's hand in guiding, developing. How do you overstate that?
Well, and what is the saying? She who rocks the cradle rules the world.
The hand that rocks the cradle
Right.
rules the
rules
world.
the
That's
world.
true.
So how we raise our children is how the world is going to go. And you're seeing, I'm going to give you an example. You see in some of the Arab nations, the way they're raising their children is not one of loving toward their neighbors. It's one of destruction. And that's the path I don't want to go down.
You know, it's interesting that those with Judeo-Christian
Right,
ethics,
right.
women gravitate toward helping professions.
That's right.
In nursing, education, various sorts of medical fields. There's something, you have a little God in your heart and mind, and it leads us to help life and guide.
But that's the difference between male and female. This is the way God made women. This is the way God made men. It's not that we are any better than each other. It's that this is what God has put in our hearts.
Yeah, I don't understand myself to be a good nurturer.
Well,
I have
but
more of a warrior kind of
Right,
thing.
but that's
Thank
your
God
job.
for my wife,
but
Patty.
that's your job. That's your job to be the warrior. We're to be the nurturers.
Yes.
So I'm really grateful for that. We'll be back after this.
Jews place quite a premium on education. That's partly because we understand ourselves to be the people of the book. The belief is that God gave us information at Sinai, and it's incumbent upon us to transmit that to future generations. Hence, education factors into the Jewish experience. Wonder if that's why in Israel today there's so many schools, all kinds of universities, and all the rest.
More museums per capita than anywhere else in the world. 10% of the workforce has either a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. 1 out of 4 is in the science, field. The education is so important to Jews, to Israel, even to the Christians.
And that translates into research and development in Israel. The
Right.
cell phones that we turned off for the studio shoot, a lot of that technology
That's
was
right.
developed in
That's right.
Israel.
That's right.
There's a culture that places a premium on learning. And if you're interested in learning, you're interested in life, knowledge
right.
quest. It's a commitment to the future.
That's right.
And by contrast here, just so you know, I'm not interested in making too many friends. We have neighbors in Israel. They're not as committed to education. There, women are silenced. Education is stifled. We don't have a lot of education, a lot of information, a lot of development, but there's a lot of control. And I'm talking about Islam, just in case you're wondering.
Well, and I knew a story of a woman that went to the Ulpan to learn Hebrew. Not only did she couldn't understand Hebrew, of course, it's why you go to Ulpan, she couldn't hold a pencil. She had not even been taught, and she was from one of the Arab countries, did not even know how to hold a pencil. That's how uneducated her country was.
Knowledge is power. And going back to the story here, here's Lois, Eunice, women in a culture 1,500 years before the printing press. And what are they doing? They're teaching.
And they're passing it on, and they pass it on, the grandmother to the mother to the son, and that's terrific. Next week we're going to talk about widows, and that was a very hard program for me. but I hope you join us because it's really going to be a good program. And as you go, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
The Levitt Letter. This free publication includes Bible lessons, insightful news commentary, Hebrew lessons, and more. Call 1-800-WONDERS. That's 1-800-966-3377. Or write to Zola, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225. You can also see our Levitt Letters, TV programs, and national airing schedule at www.levitt.com. Please remember, Zola Levitt Ministries depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you. This has been a paid program brought to you by Zola Levitt Ministries.